Hi, and welcome back for the second talk, the Big Data Conference 2022. I'm here with Jesse. Jesse will talk about the foundation of data teams. Hi, Jesse, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Mauro. Yes, my name is Jesse Anderson. I'm the managing director at Big Data Institute. I work with companies all over the world. I've written 3 books on big data, so I'm here to share some of that knowledge with you. And so we have our slides. If you can bring up the slides. There we go.
Yes. Just I remember that we have 45 minutes, and later we can put the question on time, and we are happy to respond at the end. So the stage is yours.
Yes, please do ask questions because I do appreciate questions. And it is key because you may have either something that needs to be clarified or what have you. So what we're going to talk about here are the foundations that we need to do. What foundations we need to make sure that our projects don't fail. This is a key thing if you're embarking either on a new data project or a new data team. This is what you need to do in order to avoid those failures. And that's the key part. How do we avoid that? So if you go out on social media and you go to see why people think they fail or what they need to do to succeed, you'll see things like Snowflake versus Databricks. Okay, we have to spend a ton of time looking about whether it's Databricks we should go with, whether it's Snowflake we should go with, and what the cost is and the technologies there. Or if you look at that, you see data lake versus whatever, data lake versus a data warehouse, data lake versus the stream lake, whatever the case may be. Or the other one is, what language do we use? Is it going to be Python? Is it going to be Java? Or, oh, we should have done that in Rust. That Rust would have made it so much easier or simpler or fill in the blank. So are these really the problems? These are the problems that you see in social media, but are these really the problems? And that's really what's key about what we need to think about. So why is that? It's because 85% of data projects fail. And this is a number from Gartner. You may have seen this before. This also correlates with my experience looking at data projects and actually mentoring companies on this. The vast majority of data projects fail. If you invert this, you could say only 15% succeed. And that's a really bad odds. Those are really terrible amounts where if you go tell your CEO or your board or manager and you say, well, we want to embark on this data project, but we only have a 15% success rate, they're probably not going to let you do that. So the question arises, why don't more companies create more value with data? This is what's key. They start these projects, they fail. Why does this happen? And it's because they aren't asking the right questions initially. They aren't asking, they're looking at what's on social media. Social media is talking about, we need to choose this right vendor. And this is what our vendor is telling us. Or we focus on the technology. The issue is that focusing on technology so much is not really what's important early on. It is a question that you need to ask. It is something that you do need to figure out, definitely. But your key questions early on are these ones: who, what, when, where, and how. These are the right questions that we should be asking ourselves early on in this process. Because if we get the answer to these questions right, then we'll be successful. We'll be able to set up that foundation to say, yes, this is what we need to do. So let's go through each one of these questions in turn and say, what do we need to answer and what could be those answers? So let's start with who. Who is going to do the work? We need the right people at the right ratios. And this is part of that foundation, part of this key foundation of sometimes companies will go and they'll do their big data project and they'll only start with data scientists, 100% data scientists, and there's nobody else in that room. So these data scientists, that's a problem because the data scientists have a very limited skill set. Their limit of skill set is being able to create models, create machine learning, training, that sort of thing. Their skills are not on the operations side. Their skills are not on the programming side, the systems architecture side. And so what we need is, we need data scientists, yes, but we also need data engineers and operations engineers. And it's crucial, it's very crucial that we get each one of these in the right ratio. So in that ratio, what we have often is companies with 1 data scientist to 0 data engineers. And that means that your data scientists are doing data engineering. That's a problem. That's a major problem. In my books and in my writing, I talk about how this is a strong correlation of failure. There is having no data scientists and no data engineers. This is a great way to fail. And this isn't just my opinion. This is also backed up by some of my research into this and survey data about this. So what we need is, we need a ratio of data scientists to data engineers that is more data engineers to data scientists. The usual ratio of data scientists to data engineers that I talk about is at a minimum 1 to 2. So for every 1 data scientist, you would have 2 data engineers, sometimes as high as sometimes 5, sometimes as high as 10. And the reason for this is the amount of work that goes into data science versus the amount of work that goes into data engineering is far higher. Data engineering is much, much more work, much, much more time, and therefore you need far more data engineers. This fact is also borne out by some of Google's papers and research, that the sheer amount of data science is significantly smaller than the amount of data work that needs to go into this. Likewise, if we don't have any operations people, we're never able to achieve that excellence, that operational excellence. So that's really key. We need to have each one of these people, each one of these groups of people in the right ratio. Otherwise, we will not be successful. So that's our who at this. So once again, to kind of view this, sometimes management who is coming into this to data, big data for the first time, they say, well, which one's the most important, or which one do I need? And that presupposes, or that assumes, that we just need one. We just need data scientists. So what's happened there is that management boards, they've all heard the message about data science, and they just need data scientists to be successful. But we need all 3 of these teams to be successful. Each one is just as important as the other, and each one is done at different ratios from the other. So it's really key that we get those ratios right. Now we move on to what? What is the business value? And this is another key part of teams needing to understand what they're going to do. Oftentimes, teams will focus on what they need to do technically. So they'll say, oh, we're going to do AI, therefore we need technology X, technology Y. They completely go to choosing the technologies, but they don't understand the business value, don't understand the business use cases before they make those choices. And that's really key. Sometimes other companies will say, oh, we're AI now. We're doing big data, we're doing AI, but that isn't enough. Just saying AI, that's a buzzword. You're just spouting a buzzword. What's really clear is we need a clear and attainable path to value creation. We need to say, we are going to use data, we're going to use our data, somebody else's data, to do this specific thing. That specific thing will achieve this particular business value. If you don't have that clear path, then you are just using a buzzword to patch something that you haven't thought through, or that the company is doing poorly, and we'll just throw some AI in there, and that AI will sprinkle that AI in, and by sprinkling that in, we'll solve some business problem. We need clear business value. Otherwise, we haven't answered our what. So having that data strategy, sometimes companies will say, oh, we have a data strategy, but that data strategy isn't enough. Sometimes that data strategy is, oh, we have this data, you data team, you go do something with it. That can be the extent of their data strategy. Or we have this data and our data strategy is to put it into a warehouse. That isn't enough either. We need to have very clear planning and execution. If we don't have these, then we will not have answered the what, and therefore we won't be able to clearly create value, clearly attain that value, and that's going to be a major problem. When are you going to generate this value? This may sound like a weird question of when, but when you're talking to boards, C-level people, management, they often have very unrealistic expectations of timelines. So they've read Forbes AI saying, oh, the AI is available. We just roll it out, and day 2, maybe day 3, you're getting value from it. Or they've went to a conference talk, and that conference talk completely overstated, let's say, a vendor's ability to generate value. So what happens is that they have this expectation of, oh, it's done in a few days, but the reality is something different. We're taking months, sometimes years to do this. So these unattainable timelines, they aren't very feasible. And on this few days, you need to have that talk with your management to be able to say, hey, we're not going to be able to handle those timelines. We can't do those timelines. On the other side, we have this when it's ready. And this makes the team completely unescapable, or they have no sense of timing. They have no sense of demand or need or business need. So that when it's ready, that could be 5 years from now, could be 10 years from now. That isn't feasible either, because we need to be able to say, we're going to start generating value in some number of months. And that's really key. We can't just be say when it's ready. We need to start generating that value. So why is this? It's because these projects that take too long to generate value, they're going to get canceled. So you've probably seen a lot of people talking about recessions and that sort of thing. What happens is companies will start these data projects in the best of times, and they'll say, okay, you have lots of time, you have this big runway to generate value, but that isn't what happens. What will happen is that the business climate will change, the economic climate will change, and they'll say, oh, we gave you 5 years, but we actually need something in 1 year, or we need that in 6 months. So these data projects that take too long to generate any value whatsoever, they're going to get canceled. And that leaves the team either being fired or laid off or something. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we generate value consistently. You may not be generating massive amounts of value initially, but you may need to grow and to gradually increase the amount of value being created by your data project. Likewise, the projects that promise too much, they're never going to meet the expectations. So this is where it's really key to align with management, so that what the expectations of each side is better aligned. This is another time where data teams are fighting with the marketing, especially marketing of vendors, frankly, where the marketing of vendors promises them the moon. They say, you're going to do all of this and it's going to be easy. Well, if they buy into that and they hear that, they're going to expect that of you. So they're going to have these unrealistic expectations. So really key, communication of what those expectations should be. Now we have where. Where will that data be processed? This is where we get into some of the technology. As I said, technology is key. It is an important part of it, but oftentimes what teams will do is they'll only focus on that part, only on the technology, because that's the interesting part of the equation. So we need to answer where. Data teams need to have a clear plan and architecture of where each piece will be done. So when we start to create that architecture, it isn't, here is big question mark of how we're going to do this. We need to have a pretty clear plan. And this is where teams will get into trouble, is they'll buy into oftentimes a vendor promise of, oh, this vendor can do everything. And nobody on the architecture team really validated that. So when they get to that point in time, the where is not there. It was just a promise, and it was not a correct promise. So your architecture needs to be clear and where each piece is going to be done and how. So this is really, really where teams get into trouble, especially new teams, where they'll do is they don't have the experience to be able to go and look at a technology and evaluate the technology. So they'll go and they'll base their entire architecture off a vendor or a cloud platform's recommendations. They'll see the white paper. Oh, we just follow that white paper all the way through. But the issue may be that they'll use the wrong tool for the job. There are assumptions from that vendor, from that cloud provider, that say, we assume you're doing this, we assume you're doing that. Or there may be an important caveat to what either the technology can do or that's part of your use case. And so that can make your team use the wrong tool. And using that wrong tool can be varied. It can mean it's going to be painful to use it, but we can do it, all the way to this isn't possible. We're going to have to do a lot of re-architecting. So it's really key. There is a pretty wide variety of what can happen there, but oftentimes it's the new and inexperienced teams that hit this. Now we talk about how. How will that plan be executed? Who's going to be running that plan? Who's going to be how are they going to do that? So these data teams need that clear plan that they're going to execute. This includes what I call a singular focus. The singular focus is really getting clearly focused on just doing that one thing well, rather than so many different directions. This is a problem, or this is a scenario where data teams, especially new ones, will try to solve all of the company's data problems all at once, all 10, all 20 of them at once. And the thing that happens there is that you can solve all 20 at once, but it's going to take a very, very long time to solve all 20. So from your perception, your data team is working as hard as possible. You're solving all 20. But from the business perception, it looks like you're just taking a lot of time. And so they wait and they wait. And as a direct result, you appear to not be productive. So by doing much more singular focus, working on 1 to 3 things, really focusing on those 1 to 3 things, you will get further along. You will get those things out there. So this plan needs to be put in place of this is what you're going to focus on. So really, it is important that your data teams focus, otherwise they will get bogged down. It happens so often, I see it quite often. Really, really focus on what you need and figure out. So the question you may be thinking is, how do we figure out what to focus on? You talk to your business owner, you talk to the business side. This is an issue that I see very common, is that the data teams are trying to haven't learned from the failures of software engineering teams or agile teams. And the failures of those teams is a lack of communication. If you are not communicating with the people who are using your data, you aren't going to be doing what they're expecting. You're not going to be doing what needs to be done. So it's really important that we talk to who our users are to then figure out what is the most important thing, what are the most clear things. And then once you're able to talk to them, then you're able to say, oh, this is what we're going to focus on. This is what we're going to do. So here's a bonus question of why. This is probably the one that you would start out if you're really early on in that journey. Why is your data valuable? And this is something that you'll want to answer pretty early on. If you're just starting this journey in your company, why is the data in your company valuable? The reason for this is eventually you're going to be forced to justify what you're spending. You may look at this and you may be thinking, well, it's all open source and it's relatively cheap. Well, it turns out it's still expensive. You still have to pay for the infrastructure. You still have to pay for licenses. If you're using managed services, you'll have to pay for those. But more importantly, you're going to have to pay for people. You're going to have to pay for competent people. And those competent people cost quite a bit. So you're going to have to eventually justify your budget to somebody. Maybe it's your CFO, your chief financial officer, it's somebody in accounting, it's the CEO, and you're saying, I need €1 million. Well, you're going to have to justify, if you give me those €1 million, this is what I can do with that investment. In general, for data projects, I look for a 10x ROI. So if you are going to put in let's say €1 million, I would expect that investment pay off €10 million over that year. And the reason that that's important, or that ROI is important to calculate, is eventually a person on the business side is going to ask for this number, or may not know to ask for this number. So if you're getting pushback from your C-level, from your board, from your VP, whoever it may be, if you can say, my budget is €1 million, but we have calculated it out to, we're going to get a €10 million improvement, then that's the language that the business side speaks. This is a lesson that I think data teams need to understand. When you go through and you aren't speaking the language of the person and you're talking about technologies, you're saying, oh, we're going to use Spark, we're going to use AI, and we're going to use machine learning. They may not care about that, or they may not know what that means, or they may not understand what that means for the company. If you talk in terms of return on investment, then business people's eyes light up. And that's really one thing we don't do as technologists. We don't talk in their terms as well as we should. So in general, when we look at these questions, we start by answering these questions, and then we move on to that execution. We want to start by answering each one of them and have a good answer. We want to have really good answers for them, because eventually we're going to need to use that. It may be your CEO asking you that, it may be somebody in the team asking you that, but eventually we're going to need the answers to this, because at a technical step we may need it, at a business step we may need it. It's really key to answer each one of these questions. One important part to know about this is that not all the gaps are in technology. So sometimes, as you see in that first slide we were talking about, what do people think it is? They think it's just technology. You need Snowflake, you need Databricks, you need Airflow, you just put the technology in there and that's easy. So it's much more difficult to look much deeper into the company, much deeper into the problem, to look for those gaps. So if we don't do that, if we don't go deeper, we won't know that sometimes there's gaps in people and technology. So one of the most biggest lessons I would try to tell you, if you're brand new to this or if you're in management, these AI and data projects aren't just adding a new technology. It's rarely that this happens. What is part of AI, what is part of data, is that it's an organizational change. It's a people change and it's a skill change. Each one of these changes in and of itself is actually pretty difficult to have. It is required that you will have to make an organizational change to use the AI properly. As an example, you may put, let's say, pricing in place, but the pricing is just one part. It's a technical part. But what is the impact to the rest of the team? What is the impact of changing pricing? Will people actually embrace that? Will people actually allow you to have an AI do the pricing? Or do they expect it to be in a spreadsheet? Or do they expect to be able to approve it? These are just some examples of the organizational change that happen as a result of these data projects. Data projects are rarely just technology. we just put AI in. No, there's a bunch of change that needs to happen. Organizational, people, and skills. Another big question that happens, or another issue that happens, is that there may be times when you need help. So should you get help? When should you get help? So one clear thing I want to tell you is that problems in technology or problems in data teams, they rarely work themselves out. Put a different way is sometimes management especially will think, oh, well, we don't have to worry about this problem because it will eventually work itself out. Eventually the team will just get past that. And that rarely happens. So what we want there is we want the teams to have that type of help that they need. There may be different types. Outsourcing, for example. Outsourcing may be a good route if I look at a company and it's never done software, it has no software background, they don't create software. Outsourcing may actually be the best way for them to do that because they just don't have that core competency. Maybe they need technical consulting. Maybe they need a second pair of eyes to come in and say, yes, your architecture is right. Or maybe they need management consulting. Maybe they need to help them understand this is how you organize the team. So once again, these problems, they don't fix themselves organically. You have to put concerted effort into them. If you want to read a book that I wrote, it's called Data Teams. Data Teams goes pretty deeply into the three teams, how they interact with the business. Perhaps one of the most important things that I did there, and hasn't been done before, is case studies. I did case studies on companies with large amounts of experience on this. So Twitter as an example, before it started melting down. There's a Twitter case study in there. There's various ones from around Europe as well. So those case studies, I actually went through and said, here is what happens. Here is how they set up their team. Here's how they organize their team. Here's how they run their team. Because I didn't want the book to just be my thoughts on the matter and my experience on the matter. I wanted other people's experience there. But once again, the book goes much deeper into each one of the points I've talked about, as well as other points that we may need. Perhaps the biggest one is definitions of data science, data scientists, definitions of data engineering and data engineer, definitions of operations. So if you're having questions there, I'm happy to answer those. But if you go to datateams.io, those will go into much deeper depth. So with that, thank you again, and I'll start taking questions. So the first question is from Powell. He says,
yeah,
can you
suggest you?
Oh, go ahead.
Yes, if you can suggest some resources for learning and accessing their return of investment.
So this is a difficult one because it isn't just a technical thing. It isn't just a technical person says, oh, here's the ROI. That's what it is. What it really requires is you to go to the business and say, what problem do you have that's data related? And the way I do that is I ask them, if I were to change or fix that data related problem, what would be the change to you? And sometimes that ROI isn't just, sometimes that's increased revenue, sometimes that's reduced cost, sometimes that's increased or improved conversion rates. There's a lot of parts of that ROI. So sometimes business people only think in terms of increased revenue. What you may have to help them think of is, oh, what we may be doing that's important is decreasing a cost. And by decreasing that cost, that will improve. So an example there is if somebody is manually updating a spreadsheet consistently, let's say they have a spreadsheet, and if you were to automate that using data, what would that improve? how would they be able to change that? So that could be an example of a cost. So I haven't seen any really good resources on calculating our ROI. It's much more experiential experience, and it's much more around talking to the business, talking to the business, having that conversation, and perhaps there it becomes much more of a social issue, of a communication issue. How much rapport have you created with that person? Have you established with that person? And if you show up and it's the first time you've ever been there, so I've never seen Jesse before, and here he is asking me about data, they may not either want to talk to you or know what to talk to you. And so that's where that rapport comes in. Establish that rapport, then they'll start talking, then they'll start thinking. Another way you can do this is as a group. So what I'll do when we kick off with a company on a consulting, we'll get a lot of business people and technical people in the room, and we'll go through these issues. And so what we'll be able to do is to look at that issue, not just from one person's point of view. So if you ask a marketing person about this problem, they may say, oh, the ROI of that is 1 million. But then you talk to maybe an inventory or logistics person, they say, oh, if you fix that, that's 10 million. So now you are able to calculate that up. You're able to roll that up and say, oh, fixing this is actually 11 million euro.
Yeah, that's clear. And we have another question from Katrina. How do you see data governance and data protection issues? Should it be in data teams?
So I see data governance and data protection issues as it's very industry specific. So if you're in banking, if you're in finance, that's usually that key part of data governance, data protection, have to do that. Should it be in data teams? Yes. If you want, there was an interview I just did on my podcast, the Data Dream Team podcast, talking specifically about data governance and data protection. And what is important there, and we both agreed this with a guest, her name is Kulani. We both agreed that it is key that data governance is not used as the boogeyman or this way of kind of skirting problems and saying, we can't do that, we don't have the data governance. We can't do that, it isn't secure enough. What you're trying to do is trying to figure out, how do you say yes? How do we make it so that we can do that? And so what you don't want to do is you don't want to have data governance be the place where good ideas die, because you can't do it. So yes, it should be in data teams. This is an important part where this is where you need your data engineers. Your data engineers, depending on what their experience was, their previous experience, you may need to augment that so they understand the data governance and data protection issues as well.
Yeah. This is just common to say, okay, we want to analyze the data. Okay, if I analyze the data, about to this the goal. Because sometimes, oh, we have a lot of data, what values is inside? It's quite the same for, okay, but we have to, what is the value? What is the goal? But also, what is the governance? What is the protection? And when we catch this data, there is a lot of other information that we need to put in our data teams. Okay, great. There is a question by Monica. Currently, many data scientists have a very different background and skills. Have you analyzed the proportion of specific skills and backgrounds of human resources in project?
Yes, I have. So the actual backgrounds I list out in the book. I went back and talked to quite a few data scientists and to figure out where they come from. So I have this list there of where the backgrounds are. So you have your quintessential one of mathematicians, mathematical statistical background. That's the kind of classic one. But the ones that were more interesting were physicists. I've met a lot of physicists who've transitioned over to data scientists because they're used to that experimentation model. Once again, if you want to listen to it, there is an interview I did with Eric. I can't remember his last name. He's from Bull. It's a Netherlands e-commerce place, and we talk about these backgrounds of his background. And so the two interesting backgrounds that came out of my research was economists and astrophysicists. So that one was really odd, of people with economics backgrounds. That's one of the people I interviewed for the book, Eric Colson. His background is in economics. I think he had his master's or PhD in economics, and he made that switch into data science because they're used to looking at systems, holistic systems, and calculating that out. Likewise, astrophysicists, I've met a few. They have a very interesting background. So that proportion, once you get into the proportion of backgrounds in that human resources part, I would suggest you listen to Eric's interview, because we actually go into this in even more depth. Having the right person, your data scientist can get you 80% of the way, and we talk about that. So if you have the right data scientist, they can chase a problem down, and that maybe in Eric's case, he's a physicist. He could chase that problem 80% of the way down. That remaining 20%, somebody else needed to do that. A specialist needed to do that. But that generalist data scientist, that they had the background, they had a significant background in data science, but they were able to chase it down. Hopefully that answers your question. If you have a follow-up, please put it in.
Yeah. It's also to say, okay, we have the different background, we have different skills, and when the project is well defined, it could be that we have to manage a different culture, for example, different values inside a team. So the data teams is all the teams, all the people, all the process that move from I want a result. Okay, we can move and we can have a real result.
Yeah, that's an important part that we talk about in that interview with Eric, is when you're in Europe, you're dealing with far more cultures, backgrounds, languages than you would in, let's say, other parts of the world, especially the US. You maybe have 2 or 3. And so Europe brings this whole new level of how do we get all these people from these different countries working well together? And we talked about that in there as well.
That's great. Thank you, Jesse. I check if there is other question. A lot of people say thank you to you, and they will read the book. And so it was a pleasure to have you at the Big Data Conference, and I hope to see you soon.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you coming to the talk.
Okay. Bye.